Hi, and welcome to Writing Essentials with Mrs. Benson, the Grammar Edition. For today's Grammar Edition video, we are going to be tackling punctuation, and this is part two. So part one covered just solely commas, and part two is going to cover everything else. So we've got colons, semicolons, brackets, parentheses, italics, quotation marks, and more. Lots to cover in this video, but we're pretty familiar with this stuff. So hopefully you don't find it too intimidating. The first thing I wanted to talk about today are semicolons. So, something that might be surprising to you, but I think you want to keep in mind, is that semicolons are more like a period than a comma 90% of the time. So, semicolons act more like a period. Here are some examples of that. You are going to use a semicolon. So actually, this first rule is it's more period like I was saying. You want to use a semicolon between two independent clauses that are closely related in meaning and they're not joined by a coordinating conjunction, which is one of my fanboys. So if I do not have a fanboy for and, nor, but, or, yet, so, if I don't have one of those, but I have two sentences or smaller sentences that I think, these are really on the same vein. They're of similar thought pattern. I really would like them together as one sentence. Then you can combine them with a semicolon. Okay. Today we are learning about punctuation, semicolon. We will discuss semicolons primarily. So notice how I put what could be two separate sentences together as one with that semicolon, combining the two clauses. Now, there's something called a conjunctive adverb, which is a really fancy term. If you want to think of conjunctive adverbs as transition words, that might be helpful as well. They're words that can combine two independent clauses, but they're not my fanboys. So they're words like in fact, however, therefore, moreover. So when I'm using a however or a therefore, and I'm combining two independent clauses, you've got to put the semicolon before the conjunctive adverb and then also a comma after the conjunctive adverb. This is probably the number one offense with semicolons as far as when kids get it wrong or when writers leave it out of their writing erroneously. So let's look at the example to see exactly where the semicolon goes and where the comma goes. He understands the concept, semicolon. However, comma, he still performed poorly on the test. So notice how there's a semicolon, however, comma, and then a whole other separate independent clause. Okay, so this is when I still have two independent clauses and I want to combine them with a however or therefore or moreover, some kind of conjunctive adverb, semicolon before, comma after. If you have just one independent clause and you're using the however as sort of like a parenthetical expression or just inserting it, but it's just one independent clause, then you just use commas before and after. But in this case, with two independent clauses, you really need that semicolon, however, comma. Then the last use of the semicolon that is more like a comma than a period is if I have a list of items and I need to insert semicolons rather than commas for clarity's sake. A great example is if you're giving a list of several city-state combinations. So you can see in my sentence, I have San Diego, California, I have Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I have Las Vegas, Nevada. I need the commas in between the city name and the state name, but then I want to sort of make note that I'm only listing 3 places. I'm not listing 6 places, which could be confusing if I just use commas everywhere. So in my list of city-state combinations, I'm going to use a semicolon after each one so it's very clear that I have 3 places and not 6. So look how it looks. We are going to visit San Diego, California, semicolon, Santa Fe, New Mexico, semicolon, and Las Vegas, Nevada. So this is really the only situation that has semicolons working like commas. Otherwise, they're much more like periods. If you look at the first example and the second example, it's much more a use of separating independent clauses, which would be more period-like. So we use the semicolon there if we want to keep them in the same sentence. All right, a little bit easier and faster, colons. Colons essentially mean note what follows. So it's a nice signal or like a red flag for I'm going to provide you evidence or a list. All right. There are conventional uses for colons that we are all pretty familiar with. For example, when I give time, when you're noting the scripture of a Bible verse. So I do John 3:16. When a book has a title and a subtitle, you'll put a colon after the title. Formal salutations like to whom it may concern, colon, when you're writing a letter. Those are all the conventional uses. But going back to just our uses and our usage in our everyday writing, you want to use a colon before a list, especially when you have expressions like please consider the following or note as follows, and then a colon. Be careful here though, you don't use colons all the time for lists. When I don't have that expression like the following or as follows, and if I said something like, please bring your pen, paper, and book to class, I wouldn't say, please bring your colon pen, paper, book to class. No. But if I did say, please bring the following items, colon, a paper, pen, and book, that would be grammatically correct. So notice how I need the following items in order to make it accurate. Excuse me. Now, sometimes you'll be presenting a quotation in an essay or a long formal statement in a quote, and you really need the whole quote, and you have an independent clause before it, then you can use a colon to introduce the quote itself. Let me just show you the example to make it more clear. Then Romeo noticed Juliet and cried out in joy, colon, it is my lady, it is my love. So notice how the colon introduces the quote, and it has an independent clause on the left side of the colon. Lastly, last rule for colons. When you have two independent clauses and the second is kind of an explanation of the first or evidence of the first, and they're both independent, you can use a colon for the one to introduce the other. Your essay is excellent, colon. The writing is dynamic and my screen's cut off. The analysis is very thorough. So the second piece, the writing is dynamic, that sentence or that independent clause is the evidence for the first independent clause. So generally speaking with colons, you want to really remember to use independent clauses in your colon world. Have an independent clause, colon, and then your list, or an independent clause, colon, and then your complete sentence quote. Speeding up even more, we have italics. Remember to use italics for major works, and you use quotation marks for minor works. So when we're talking about major works, those are books, periodicals, long poems like epic poems, plays, films, television series, long musical works, works of art, and planes, trains, and automobiles, okay? So those all have italics when we're typing. If you're handwriting, sometimes it's hard to tell if something's italicized. So whenever you're handwriting something, if it needs to include the title of a novel or a play or something, you underline it. That's only when you're handwriting. When you are typing, use your italics. You can easily hit the italicize button. Quotation marks are for the smaller stuff, okay? So bigger, think italics, smaller, think quotation marks. So those are your titles of articles, titles of essays, short stories, poems, songs, the TV episode names, chapters in a book. And of course, you use quotation marks when you have direct quotations. So when you're doing dialogue in an essay, when you are presenting a quotation or quoted material in your essay. And there's a lot of rules that have to go with embedding your quotes and the punctuation of them, but I'm not going to cover those in today's episode, but they will be covered in the quotation embedding video. So check that out. All right, apostrophes are something that we learned back in elementary school, so hopefully this won't be too intimidating. You want to make sure that you're using apostrophes with possessive case, with singular nouns. When you have plural nouns that end in S, you put the apostrophe after it, students' books. When you have a plural noun that doesn't end in S, then you put it after the word and then the S. So women, apostrophe S for women's. Possessive personal pronouns do not need apostrophes at all. So yours, ours, we don't need them. But if you have indefinite pronouns, you do need the apostrophe S. So anyone's, apostrophe S, everyone's, apostrophe S. When you have compound words, you want to go with the last word to be in possessive form. So mother-in-law's, not mother's-in-law, or John and Tammy's house, not John's and Tammy's house. If there's separate ownership, separate entities, then each one needs the apostrophe S. Obviously, when you use contractions, you want to have apostrophes to combine those two words with the contraction. And if I'm telling my reader that I have a plural of something more numerical or just a letter, so if I say I got straight A's, it's A apostrophe S, or don't forget to look out for the twos, 2 apostrophe S. All right, hyphens. We want to use hyphens when we create compound numbers. So when we have compound numbers like 22, 20-2. When you have prefixes, so like ex-president, non-American, great-grandpa, notice all those hyphens in there. And then only a couple suffixes, president-elect, sugar-free, so elect and free are really important ones. And then the last hyphen rule is that when you have compound adjectives before a noun, you do want to use a hyphen. So well-written paragraph, I use a hyphen between the well and the written. All right, we're getting there. Parentheses and dashes. You want to use parentheses to enclose material that really could be overlooked. So if I put something in parentheses as a writer, I'm basically understanding that my reader might skip over this. You know, if he's in a hurry, he might just skip right over what I put there. So it's the least important information you put in parentheses. For the dash, you use a dash when you want to have a very abrupt break in your sentence. So we're talking a clear interruption of what's happening. Think of, someone talking in dialogue in your narrative, and then all of a sudden there's a crash and that person's interrupted, and we totally shift gears. So I thought it was true. Frank, are you listening? That he broke up with her. So see that, Frank, are you listening? It totally goes in a different direction than the rest of the sentence. So we want to make sure that's offset with dashes. And you can also use the dash in a similar way when you're kind of elaborating on an idea or giving an explanation in a much more informal tone. He obviously loves pizza, cheese pizza to be exact. The work of a teacher, namely the work of an English teacher, is often filled with joy. And lastly, love-possessed Romeo, according to most interpretations, suffers from myopia throughout the play. I love the word myopia. So cool. All right, I think we're getting near the end. Last slide. So when you use ellipses and brackets. So the ellipsis is the ... Okay, so when do we use the ... That is a signal that we have omitted something. So when we're giving a quote and we omit information and we want to include the stuff at the beginning and the stuff at the end, we can use those ellipses, those ... in order to present the quoted material. I have a big caution about that. We do not want to, again, look like we have pepper sprinkled all over our essay because we have so many dots everywhere. Dot, because let's say your teacher says, you need to give me 8 quotes in this essay from the novel. And you think, gosh, well, every quote, I better put a dot, because there was something that was before it in the book. No, that's not the case. We know there's stuff before and after. So don't feel like you always have to put a dot. What you want to do is just embed your writing. Give me the quoted material, your wording before, your wording after, or the end of the sentence, and call it a day. So you really only want to use the dot. You really only want to use those ellipses if you're very purposefully needing to include a very long sentence and you just want to take a chunk out or need to take a chunk out, or you're emphasizing that the character went on and on and on to this point, or the narration went on and on and on to this point. So once in a while, maybe, but certainly not every time you give a quote. Again, in the quotation embedding video, you'll get more talk on this. Lastly, with brackets, anytime you insert something in a direct quote, you need to put it in brackets because this was not the original. The brackets are a signal that something's been changed. And we expect this to happen because you'll need to change tense, you'll need to change pronouns, you may need to change plural versus singular. So just use those brackets to clarify things and to ease the reading in your own essay when you're giving quoted material. All right, I know that was a long one, but there are so many different marks of punctuation, and now we've covered the big guys. If you have any questions, send them my way. Take care and have a great day.